That night, as I was cleaning a plate of dishes in the kitchen, there was a deep silence. Silence had become something I was used to in the house. Mark's absence had filled our home with a heavy weight. Since his father's death, Liam had become increasingly withdrawn. He usually stayed in his room for hours, rarely came out, or spoke to me, but that night, things were different. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound behind me. The light sound of footsteps coming from the door startled me. When I turned around, I saw Liam. He was looking into my eyes, his face showing an expression I wasn't accustomed to. "Mom, can I help?" he asked. His tone was soft but eerily calm. The vacant expression in his eyes both comforted and unsettled me. Normally, this would have been a simple question, but this situation felt strangely odd. "Sure," I said, handing him a towel. His hands trembled as he took it. We stood side by side in silence, starting to work. As usual, I expected him to act cold and distant, but suddenly he started talking. "I haven't talked to you much since Dad left, have I?" he said. His words caught me off guard. I felt the lump in my throat but didn't show it. "I know, Liam," I said, "but everyone deals with this in their own way." I further lowered my head and continued rinsing dishes. But he did not stop. "You think Dad is watching us?" he asked, the resonance in his voice sounding hollow. This question sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe he's watching," I replied, my voice full of trepidation. I could feel him watching me, with both his eyes and the strange energy he was giving off. Liam ceased washing dishes and leaned against the counter. At this moment, I noticed that his hands were clenched. I could see the whitening of his fingers and wanted to ask him, but said nothing. "Sometimes, I feel like he's here," he said suddenly. "Sometimes, I'm sure he's watching me." His tone was both unsettling and profoundly sad. I was puzzled. "Liam, that's just normal," I tried to reassure him, but one look into his face after my reassurance showed he didn't feel any better. In that instant, the kitchen light flickered once. I thought it was just a slight electric problem, but Liam did a step back. "Mom, is he here?" he whispered. The cold in his tone was contagious as it overflowed into me, too. "Who is here, Liam?" I asked, shaking my voice. "Dad," he answered briefly. "He's watching me." In an instant, the air in the kitchen became thick. A silent force seemed to slide between us. My heart began pounding. "Liam, Daddy's gone." I attempted to soothe him with my voice, but Liam shook his head from side to side. "Neen," he said doggedly. "He didn't leave. I feel him. He comes into my room every night." These words froze my blood. "What do you mean, Liam? This isn't possible," I said, but he silently lowered his head and added, "His eyes are always on me, Mom, even when I'm sleeping. Sometimes, I can feel his breath." There was silence in the kitchen for a while. Liam's words wouldn't leave my mind. I shivered. At that moment, I wanted to hug him, but I took a step back. Something inside me told me that tonight was different from all the others. "Mom, I'm scared to be alone," Liam suddenly said. His eyes caused a deep ache somewhere inside me, but it wasn't just fear. There was something deeper, more complex. I wanted to comfort him, but the words caught in my throat. I only touched his shoulder with my hand. As the night went on, Liam didn't speak anymore, but what he said kept echoing in my mind. Not knowing what would happen that night, I retreated to my bedroom with unease. In bed, Liam's words trapped my thoughts, and in that moment, I realized that this was only the beginning. I woke up around midnight. The air in my room felt strangely heavy, as if something had awakened me. The time was exactly 2:43 a.m., and the house was extremely quiet. But this silence was out of the ordinary. I couldn't even hear the wind outside. A dark shadow had fallen over the room, and I felt strangely uncomfortable inside. Just as I was trying to get back to sleep, I noticed the door was slightly open. My heart pounded. "Mother?" Out of the darkness came Liam's faint rumbling voice. It sounded almost like a whisper, but it was taking in the silence of the room. "Liam, what are you doing here at this hour?" I asked as I sat on the bed. I saw the silhouette in the doorway. Her eyes seemed to glow in the shadows. "I can't sleep," he said in a quiet, uneasy voice. "It's so quiet here. I'm afraid." It was unusual for Liam to admit he was terrified of his age. I wanted to talk through it and comfort her. "Come sit down," I said, pointing to the side of my bed. But he didn't move. He stopped at the door, still looking at me. "I have to ask you something," he said suddenly. The seriousness in his voice made me sit up straight on the bed. "What do you want to ask?" Liam, I said. I'm sorry. The depression was building in me. I could feel the tension spreading in the room. Liam walked in slowly, his face clear in the darkness. As he approached, of him, I could clearly see the exposed face. On his face, his eyes filled with intense pain. But there was something else in that pain, something dark that I cannot explain. When Dad left, he started, but his voice trembled, and he paused. When Dad left. What? I pressed, knowing I couldn't stop myself from asking. He stared silently at my face for a while, then looked down at the floor. I don't want to leave you alone, he said finally, but the tone in those words felt like something far deeper than a desire to protect. Liam, I'm fine, I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. You'll be okay, too. We'll get through this together. But he shook his head. I don't feel that way, Mom. It's like something is wrong in this house. These words froze my blood. Wrong? What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Liam took a deep breath and glanced around the room, as if he wanted to make sure no one was listening to us. Some nights, I feel like Dad is still here, he said finally. There was a moment of silence. The weight of those words settled into the room. Liam, this is normal, I said. You miss your dad, and that's completely natural, but he's not here anymore. Liam steps back. His eyes looked at the ground. But he misses you too, he said softly. At that moment I felt a shiver run through me. Liam's words didn't feel like the thoughts of an ordinary child. They have a deeper meaning. Liam, go back to your bed, I said, my voice a little firmer, but he shook his head. Mom, can you come to my room? I don't want to be alone, he said, even though inside I feel uncomfortable, but I didn't want to leave him. Okay, I said, getting up from the bed. As I walked down the hall to his room, Liam was one step behind me. When we walked into his room, everything seems to fall into place. But the atmosphere in the room was cold and dark. That feeling is deep within me. Okay, I'm here, I told him. Now relax and sleep, okay? Liam sat on his bed, still keeping an eye on me. Mommy, stay here with me, he said. I don't want to frighten him anymore. So I sat down on the edge of the bed. But Liam's words that night never left me. Is his belief that his father is still here just his imagination of the grieving process, or is he feeling something? When I asked these questions, I felt Liam's gaze on me in the darkness of the room. At that time it was nearly 3 in the morning, and the whole room was so quiet that he could barely move. Emma thought that Liam was sleeping on the bed and watched the door slowly open. Open again. It didn't take him long to realize who her shadow was. Mom, Liam's quiet voice echoed in the darkness. Emma lifted her head and looked toward the door. Liam, what are you doing here at this hour? She asked, trying not to add any harshness to her voice. Her son took a few steps into the room, his eyes briefly looking down before he lifted his head and met Emma's gaze. I just can't sleep, he said, but there was something missing in those words. His voice didn't sound like someone genuinely complaining about insomnia. Emma sat up in bed and made room for Liam. Come sit. Do you want to talk? She asked. Liam hesitated but nodded, then sat at the edge of the bed. Emma studied her son's face carefully. His eyes were as sad as usual, but somehow, they seemed different. There was something deeper, something more complex hiding behind them. Mom, Liam began, staring at the patterns on the bedspread. Do you think Dad might be watching us? This question caught Emma off guard. At this time of night, she wasn't expecting a conversation like this. She felt a chill run through her, but tried not to show it. Liam, your dad is not here anymore, but his memories are with us, she said, her voice gentle, but it seemed like her words didn't satisfy Liam. No, Liam said, shaking his head. It feels like he's really here. Sometimes, I can feel his breath. I think he's watching me. Emma's unease began to grow. I think this is normal. Liam, she said, trying to stay calm. You miss your dad, and these feelings might make you feel like he's still here, but it's not real. Suddenly, Liam's face tightened, as if he did not want to hear that explanation. I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I even hear his voice. Emma grew even more uneasy at the ominous words from her son. When do you hear this voice? She asked cautiously. He stared into the darkness. Usually at night. It feels like he is calling me, but most of all, I feel it when I am near your room. That sentence sent a chill down Emma's spine. Near my room? She asked, her voice shaking unintentionally. Liam nodded and then turned to Emma. Sometimes, when you are asleep, I just stand by your door. I want to protect you because he sometimes feels like he is angry. Her heart was frantic. Liam, the things you're feeling are worrying me, she said, gently rubbing his shoulder. These aren't even real, okay? They're just all in your mind. But Liam pushed her hand aside softly and got up. Maybe that's true, he said quietly, but I'm really not sure. I just want to protect you. Emma was watching him as he strode out of the room, taking in a breath. What her son had to say couldn't just be what dreams were all about in the grieving process. She had never heard anything like this before. A certain fear was growing deep in her, yet she did not know its cause. She remained awake all night, her eyes constantly drifting to the door. After some time, she finally fell asleep, but Liam's words echoed in her mind. When she woke again in the early hours of the morning, she noticed that her bedroom door was slightly ajar. She got up, stepped into the hallway, and headed for Liam's room. She slowly opened the door, but what she saw inside shocked her. Liam wasn't in his bed. The room was empty. She immediately began searching the house. The living room, the kitchen, everywhere was quiet and dark. Then, she heard Liam's voice coming from the guest room upstairs. Mom, I'm here. Emma rushed upstairs. When she opened the door, she found Liam sitting on the floor, his hands over his head. What happened, Liam? Emma asked, kneeling beside him. Her son looked at her with wide, fearful eyes. He's here, Mom. He's here, and he's blaming me. Emma's blood froze. Liam's eyes contained an odd admixture of fear, regret, and guilt. Emma went and sat beside him, wrapping her arms around him in an attempt to come to grips with the meaning of the words. But that night passed without providing her with answers, leaving her drained and exhausted. By morning, Emma was practically a walking ghost, very light. She hadn't slept. All she had wanted was to replay Liam's words over and over again in her mind. He's here, and he's blaming me, echoed in Emma's mind. She was going downstairs to make herself a cup of coffee, when from Liam's room came a noise of a door. Walking inside, she found Liam crouched by the window, wearing the strangest look on his face, a blank stare, pale face. Liam, Emma almost softened her voice. There was trouble in her son, and she knew there was no longer any postponement to the conversation they were about to have. Liam, without turning his head, Mom, it may be hard for you to grasp, but I can't hide it from you anymore. These words fell onto Emma's chest like an enormity. She held her breath. He was still going on. Dad, the boy's voice faltered. I'm involved in Dad's death. Emma's expression froze. Her heart seemed to speed up, and yet she knew her son must complete this confession. What do you mean, Liam? What happened? Liam buried his face in his hands and continued. That day, Dad and I argued. We had a huge fight. I was listening to music in my room, and he came in and started yelling at me. I got so angry. I said things I shouldn't have. I was so mad. I yelled at him. I wish you weren't here. Liam paused at this point, struggling to speak through the lump in his throat. Emma was in deeper shock with every word her son spoke, but she remained silent because this was not the moment to judge him. Do you feel guilty because of what you said? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice as calm as possible. No, Liam exploded, lifting his head. His eyes were filled with tears. That was just the beginning. After the argument, Dad went outside and got in his car. I followed him. I was so angry. I couldn't bear to never see him again. As I walked toward the car, I lost control. I started kicking the tires. He yelled at me. Then, Liam stopped, struggling to breathe. Emma's tension grew. Then what happened, Liam? Then, the car suddenly moved. Dad lost control as he tried to reverse. And he crashed. I heard the sound when it hit the pole, but I ran. Mom, I didn't know what to do in that moment. I left him there. When the police came, they called it an unfortunate accident. No one knew I was there. Emma was breathless. She could hardly believe that her son had been hiding such a huge secret for years. Liam, why are you telling me this now? She asked, swallowing the lump in her throat. Because I think Dad's spirit is watching me, Liam said, locking eyes with his mother. He comes into my dreams every night. I feel like he hasn't forgiven me. The reason I try to protect you is because I'm afraid he'll take you too. Emma was shaken by her son's words. She didn't know what to say or what to do. Liam, this might just be a reflection of your guilt. Dad isn't watching you, but you need to face these feelings, she said gently. Liam shook his head. No, Mom, you don't understand. The other night, I felt his breath. I saw him walking toward your room. He was looking at you like he was going to take you. It's real. Emma's mind was in chaos. Her son was struggling with guilt and fear, but at the same time, he seemed to be drifting further from reality. She tried to calm him down. We need to face these feelings. But first, we need to talk to a professional, she said. But Liam opposed the idea. No, I can't tell anyone. I'm afraid I'll make him angrier. As Emma tried to ease her son's emotional burden, she also began to understand just how dangerous this situation was. If Liam's words weren't just illusions, then Emma herself was in danger. That night, Emma's mind was consumed by the weight of Liam's confession, even though she didn't believe her son was really seeing a ghost. As the hours passed and she retreated to her own room, she noticed her own fear growing. Any sound or movement was enough to make her jump in alarm. After midnight, the door to Emma's room slowly creaked open again. She sat up in fear and looked toward the door, but this time it wasn't Liam who entered. The dark emptiness of the hallway suddenly became unsettling. The shadow behind the door was not Liam's, but the sign of something else. Emma scanned the shadow with her eyes. Her breath shallow. Her eyes were filled with darkness, and her heart raced faster with each passing second. The silence in Liam's room had been overtaken by the feeling that something was wrong. In that moment, she realized that in the room with her wasn't just Liam, but also the fears and guilt she had accumulated over the years. How much of what was happening that night was real? Did Liam really carry such a heavy burden, or was it all a mental breakdown? As the door slowly closed, Emma stood still. A million thoughts swirled in her mind. But one thing was clear, Liam's confessions had shaken her trust in him. She thought about his relationship with his father, the trauma brought on by death, and how much that trauma had changed them. But more importantly, she thought about what this fear and guilt could do to them. Emma felt like a boat drifting on the edge of a river, pulled in every direction by an uncertain journey. Early the next morning, Emma went to Liam's room. She gently knocked on the door but didn't enter. The only sound from behind the door was Liam silently getting out of bed and sitting on the edge. Emma paused for a moment, once again feeling how deep her son's situation was. She had to face him, confront her own fears, and deal with Liam's trauma. "Liam," Emma said, standing in the doorway, her voice soft. "What are we going to do from here? Everything is so complicated, and we need to face these fears and mysteries together." Liam silently nodded. For a brief moment, it was as if he were living in another world. Emma felt something stir inside her, but getting closer to him wasn't easy. Understanding the fear inside Liam might bring them closer, but it also felt like a difficult journey. Suddenly, Emma heard a strange sound. The room was filled with an eerie coldness. Liam's eyes seemed fixed on Emma, as if he could sense the fear inside her. Emma took a step back. "Son. What's happening? Why are you looking at me like that?" Liam's eyes seemed lost, like he was in a dream. "He's here," he said in a trembling voice. "He won't forgive me. He's watching us." Emma struggled to understand Liam's words as the tension grew. Liam claimed that his father's spirit was haunting him, refusing to forgive him and threatening to take Emma as well. Emma, filled with fear, realized that the guilt Liam felt was tied to deeper, unresolved secrets about his father's death. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma searched the house, feeling an increasing sense of dread. She had always sensed there were unanswered questions surrounding his death, and now she was compelled to find them. As she examined old photos of her father, she found a hidden letter, revealing a truth that had been concealed for years. Emma's fear intensified, realizing that the story was not just about guilt but a darker connection to the past. In that moment, Emma understood that Liam's fears were grounded in something far deeper, and that they were approaching the end of a long